Welcome to another deep dive. This time, Zen Buddhism. I'm ready to go beyond, like, the Zen basics. What's it all about? How do the practices actually work? And do those ideas really stand up to, like, scrutiny?
Full of intriguing paradoxes and bold claims, too. A critical look. Yeah, that's what we need.
Okay, great. You've already got a good foundation right. But the story of its origins, always fascinating.
Oh, yeah.
This Indian monk, Bodhidharma, traveling to China, sixth century, right?
Right. And legendary journey. What's so fascinating is the message. It's about experiencing truth. Directly, he kind of cut through all that dogma, like intellectualization, challenged the established, well, Buddhist practices, at the time at least. That planted the seeds for Zen.
Okay, so that main difference between Zen and the other forms, this emphasis on direct experience.
It was a key thing. Practice over like scripture, intuition, over just straight intellectual analysis. You can see this like reflected in its core practices.
Okay, like Zazen. Let's talk about that. I've always been kind of curious about how Zen meditation really works. It's not about completely emptying your mind, right?
Not quite, no. It's more about a different kind of awareness. You observe your thoughts and your sensations, but without getting carried away. You know what I mean?
Okay.
No judgment, just like pure observation. Imagine just sitting by a stream, the water, it's flowing by. You don't try and stop it. You don't change its course.
Right.
That's the essence of Zazen.
Okay, I get that. Makes sense to me. It's more like shifting your relationship with your thoughts, not just trying to force them away.
Right.
The book also mentioned shikantaza. Just sitting, is that right? Is that like a specific thing within Zazen?
Exactly. Shikantaza, it's often translated as just sitting, letting go of any striving, goal-oriented thinking. During meditation, you're not trying to get to a particular state of mind. You just let your experience unfold moment by moment.
Yeah,
It can be pretty challenging.
I bet. You're fighting like a lifetime of conditioning to try and control your thoughts and emotions and everything.
Yeah.
But this awareness that you cultivate, it's not just supposed to stay on that cushion.
Oh, absolutely not. Zen, it encourages you to bring that mindfulness to everything. Walking, eating, working, how you interact with others. It all becomes an opportunity to practice.
That's interesting. So it's about integrating the practice into life, not just some separate activity.
Precisely. And this leads to another core concept in Zen, Satori, or as we know it, enlightenment.
Right. Enlightenment. I've always been kind of fascinated by that. But it's mysterious, too. It's like, is it a sudden thing, a mystical experience, or is it gradual, a gradual awakening?
Oh, yeah, that question. It's puzzled Zen practitioners. For centuries, you've got those stories of sudden awakenings, but you also have teachings. They say it's a gradual thing.
Yeah.
Maybe it's both.
No one right answer?
Not really. Every person's path is different, but there are some things, some common characteristics.
Like, what does enlightenment look like in Zen?
Well, what the thing is, this sense of non-duality, the idea that the separation between you and I dissolves. You start to see, like, the interconnectedness of everything. And that separation, it's an illusion.
Wow. That's a pretty radical shift.
It is.
How does that realization change how we live?
It can lead to a greater compassion, this deeper connection to everything, a release from the suffering, I think, that comes from clinging to a separate sense of self.
Wow. A lot to think about there.
Yeah.
It seems like this idea of the self is kind of crucial to Zen.
It is, and it gets even more challenging here, because Zen says the self, as we usually think of it, is an illusion.
Well, hold on, an illusion. How? I mean, we experience ourselves as solid, separate.
Right, that's the paradox, but it draws on this Buddhist teaching, anatman, no self. It suggests what we think is our solid, independent self is actually just a collection of, well, changing things, thoughts, sensations, perceptions, and there's no permanent thing behind it.
Okay, my brain is doing backflips right now. If there's no separate self, how does that change how we live? Does it mean we can have responsibility for our actions?
That's a good question, and we'll get into that as we explore the ethics of Zen, but it doesn't mean we become passive or nihilistic. Instead, it can lead to a more compassionate and responsible way of being, but it requires a rethinking.
Okay. Rethinking some fundamental assumptions.
Yeah.
This is a perfect segue, I think, into another aspect of Zen that I've always been curious about. Koans. These paradoxical riddles.
Exactly. Designed to kind of short-circuit our logical minds, point us toward a direct experience, break us free from conceptual thinking, nudge us toward a deeper understanding.
You know, I've tried to wrap my head around that famous one. What is the sound of one hand clapping? But I always end up more confused than enlightened.
That's the point. They're not supposed to be solved intellectually. They're invocations to contemplate, to meditate, to let go of those usual ways of thinking.
Okay, so it's more about surrendering to the mystery than trying to, like, figure it all out.
Exactly. And that's where a master can be so valuable.
Right, the master-disciple relationship. Another unique aspect of Zen. Can't wait to explore that. But first, let's dig into the ethical dimensions. If the self is an illusion, how does that shape how we live, act in the world?
Zen ethics can be a bit tricky to grasp, because, well, it kind of turns our usual ideas about right and wrong upside down.
Right.
If there's no self to be rewarded or punished, then, like, what's the point? What's the motivation for being ethical?
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. It almost seems counterintuitive.
It's a paradox, but in Zen, ethical action, it arises not out of fear of punishment or wanting a reward, but from a deeper understanding of that interconnectedness.
Okay, so it's more about realizing that harming others is ultimately harming ourselves, since we're all part of this interconnected web.
Precisely. And that interconnectedness, it gives rise to compassion, and compassion, it's really at the heart of Zen ethics. Practices like loving kindness meditation and Tonglen. You familiar with Tonglen? It involves taking on the suffering of others. That helps cultivate compassion.
Taking on the suffering of others. That sounds incredibly challenging.
It can be. It's a profound practice, but it's not about, like, literally absorbing all the suffering in the world. It's more about cultivating empathy, understanding, recognizing that we're all in this together.
I see. It's about expanding that circle of concern beyond ourselves.
Exactly. And this brings us back to the importance of mindfulness in Zen ethics.
Right, because mindfulness is about being present in every moment, making conscious choices, thinking about the impact of what we do on ourselves and others.
Precisely. Living with awareness. And that's where the master-disciple, that relationship, it comes in. Providing, I think, guidance and support on this path.
Okay, let's get into that. You said earlier that the master helps the student towards enlightenment. How?
It's a unique dynamic. The master isn't just teaching. They're more like a mirror, reflecting back all the students' delusions and attachments.
Oh, okay, so it's less about teaching and more about creating the conditions for the student to have their own insights?
Exactly. And they use unconventional methods like koans, to kind of break through the students' preconceived notions, jolt them out of their habitual way of thinking.
And sometimes a whack with a stick. I've heard those stories.
Yes, you've got those stories. But the physical discipline thing, it's controversial. Thankfully, less common these days, modern Zen.
It does highlight the intensity and the potential for abuse, I guess, in that relationship.
Yeah, you're right. Careful discernment, clear boundaries. Essential, it's not blind obedience, but mutual respect, this shared commitment to the path of awakening.
Trust and clear communication.
Yeah, absolutely. And when it works the way it's supposed to, it can lead to a formal Dharma transmission.
Right. Dharma transmission. You mentioned that before. Could you explain what it means, how it works?
It's a profound thing. In Zen, it's basically the master recognizing that the student has reached a deep level of understanding, realization. It's not just a knowledge. It's about a direct transmission of experience, embodiment of those teachings.
Passing the torch, so to speak.
Exactly, to make sure that lineage continues.
Right. So that means the student is ready to teach, to guide others.
Exactly. Big responsibility.
It is, this emphasis on lineage and tradition. It's also in all the Zen rituals, right? The ceremonies. Have you ever seen one?
Oh, yeah.
What are they like?
They've got a quiet beauty, formality, from daily things like morning chanting and meditation to more elaborate ones, the tea ceremony, a ritualized way of preparing, serving tea, emphasizes mindfulness and presence.
I've heard about the tea ceremony. What's the deeper meaning behind it?
It's more than just a cup of tea. Every movement, every gesture, it means something. It's about awareness in simple actions, finding stillness, presence, in the midst of life.
Meditation in motion.
You could say that, and then you've got the Dharma transmission ceremonies, where they formally acknowledge, celebrate a student's enlightenment.
So each ritual has its own symbolism and purpose.
Right, like bowing, common in Zen ceremonies, that's about humility, respect. Incense offerings, they symbolize purification. Every element, it's helpfully chosen to create the right atmosphere for contemplation, awakening.
There's a lot to those rituals. But let's shift gears. Talk about Zen's influence on Western culture. You've studied this a lot, right?
I have. And Zen, it's had a surprisingly big impact in the West, way beyond those who practice it. Its ideas, they're in art, literature, psychology, even business.
Really? Business too? That's interesting.
It is. The focus on mindfulness, focus in general, simplicity, that resonates.
Yeah. Tell me about some of those key figures. Who brought Zen to the West?
D.T. Suzuki, key figure, his writings, back in the early 20th century, introduced Zen to a Western audience. They were looking for new spiritual ideas. And then you've got Alan Watts. His books, lectures in the 60s, made Zen more accessible, especially during the counterculture movement.
Zen. Yeah. I can see the appeal for that generation's search for meaning, authenticity.
Absolutely. And it goes into art and literature, too. Jack Kerouac's book, The Dharma Bums, captured the spirit of Zen, how it influenced the Beat generation, minimalist aesthetic, in art, design, inspiration from Zen, simplicity, emptiness.
Diverse. Far-reaching influence. Makes me wonder how it interacts with Christianity. Seems like a very different tradition.
It is a fascinating and complex intersection. There are things they share, the emphasis on love, compassion, the pursuit of transcendence, but big differences too. You can't ignore those.
Yeah, what are some of those key areas where they clash?
Well, Christianity, it believes in God, a personal God. Zen is not like that, no God. And their views on claration, the self, the path to liberation, totally different.
And that's where the book comes in. Debunking Zen Buddhism. He's saying Zen and Christianity, not compatible.
Exactly. He argues that Zen teachings contradict core Christian beliefs, raises concerns about the history, the logic, the evidence.
Specific critiques, what does he say?
One big one is samsara, the endless cycle, birth, death, rebirth. Zen wants to escape it. Christianity, it focuses on salvation through faith in Jesus.
Fundamentally different ways of looking at things.
Right. He also challenges that Zen idea that the self is an illusion, says it contradicts what Christians believe about identity, responsibility.
Irreconcilable differences, then, between the two.
Yeah, it's a major point of tension. He also argues that Zen teachings, they've got factual errors, logical contradictions, undermines their credibility.
Like what? For example?
He questions reincarnation, says the idea of no self, it leads to problems. When you talk about responsibility, ethics.
So he's saying Zen doesn't hold up to scrutiny from a Christian point of view.
That's his argument. And he criticizes the reliance on subjective experience in Zen. Says it opens the door to bias, misinterpretations.
Okay, so how do we navigate that? How do we figure out what's valuable in Zen, even if we don't buy into? Well, the teachings. Yeah, that is the question, isn't it? How do we sort through all this and find what works for us, what speaks to us?
I think you got to approach Zen with an open mind, but a critical one too. You don't have to swallow everything whole, but you can still find value in the insights and the practices, even if, you don't agree with everything, the metaphysical stuff and all that.
So take what works for you and leave the rest.
Yeah, something like that. You can explore Zen meditation, the mindfulness practices without becoming a Buddhist.
Right, a lot of people, they get something out of mindfulness. Meditation without necessarily, following all the beliefs and everything.
Exactly. And even if you disagree with parts of it, engaging with the ideas can still be good for you intellectually, spiritually.
Challenges us to think about what we believe, our own assumptions. That's always a good exercise.
It is, pushes us out of our comfort zones to see things differently, the world, ourselves.
One of the biggest challenges, I think, for us is this whole no self thing. So counterintuitive to how to usually think.
It is. We're basically programmed to believe in a self, our solid, independent self. To say it's an illusion, yeah, that's unsettling.
James, he's saying it undermines responsibility, ethical behavior. But you said before, it can lead to a more compassionate way of being. So how do we square those two?
Well, it's tricky. The key, I think, is to understand that no self. It doesn't mean there's nobody acting. It just means our actions. They don't come from a separate ego self, but from this web of causes, conditions, interconnected.
So it's not about denying our agency, but about seeing that our actions, they have an impact, consequences on the world around us.
Exactly. And if we see ourselves as connected to everything else, that creates compassion, responsibility.
It's like they say, hurt people, hurt people.
Yeah. So, no self. Sounds strange at first, but it can lead to a better way of life, more ethical, more compassionate.
That's really interesting. A lot more to explore here, more than we have time for.
There always is. But
Hmm.
we've covered a lot: the origins, the core ideas, the practices, from meditation to enlightenment to ethics, the whole master-student thing, and how Zen has influenced Western culture, that dialogue, Christianity.
It's been, what a journey, through all the paradoxes and insights of Zen Buddhism. What stands out to you? The biggest takeaway?
For me, it's the mindfulness, the presence, whether you agree with everything or not. Cultivating that awareness in everyday life, that's something everyone can benefit from.
Totally agree. And engaging with ideas. Even the ones that challenge us, the ones we disagree with, it helps us grow, I think, intellectually, spiritually.
Stretches the mind and the heart, see new things, new ways of looking at things.
So, we're wrapping up our deep dive here, but I keep coming back to that koan. What is the sound of one hand clapping? Makes you think outside the box, experience the world directly.
Maybe that sound of one hand clapping, it's the sound of us letting go of all our preconceived ideas, embracing the mystery of it all.
That's a great thought to end on. To everyone listening, thanks for joining us on this exploration of Zen Buddhism. Hope it gave you something to think about. May your own journey be filled with mindfulness, compassion, and a sense of wonder